once you go through the first round, you kind of become an unqualified lawyer, but you can still navigate the first few conversations your own because you start to learn the lingo, the tricks, the loopholes. You do absolutely need a lawyer to review it and ensure all the I's are dotted. So my name is Imad Hammad. I'm the founder of CarSwitch.com, which is a marketplace digitizing the sale of used cars in the Middle East, currently operating out of the UAE and launching in Saudi Arabia later this year.
And how did you come up with this concept? How did you find there was a real need for this in the region?
Sure. So approximately 4 years ago or so, I left a consulting career to found CarSwitch. I wanted to try the entrepreneurial track and do something different. Personally, I've been a fan of cars. I've always bought used cars, never really bought new because of the value for money equation. And it is a very difficult or very scary, I would say, almost process, right? So buying a car is probably the largest financial transaction you ever make next to real estate. You don't do it that often. And so you're not really qualified to buy or sell a car for that matter. And it's quite shocking that there's very little assistance around it. Even with all the technology that's come up and all the kind of facilitation through apps that's happened, very little has happened in the used car space, or at least 4 years ago, particularly in the Middle East and in the UAE, where pricing is opaque, the process is quite convoluted, and the risk is very high because it's a large financial transaction. Things can go wrong. You could get ripped off. You could buy a lemon. You could suffer for years on repairs and the costs associated with it. So that was the motivation, if you will, around disrupting the space, if you will. And I do feel that it is a space worthy of disruption. We launched CarSwitch, which tackles the problem and the use case through certain angles. I think over the last few years, several players have come up to tackle car buying in different models and in different ways. We feel very confident, and I'm very happy and proud, so to speak, around the way we are tackling it. And it is quite different. So we continue to tackle this space from a marketplace angle. And what we effectively do is leverage technology to facilitate the transaction, facilitate the process. So what that means is private individuals or private folks want to sell their used car, and private individuals want to buy a used car. And we handle the process A to Z through our app, as well as through offline intervention to ensure the transaction goes through smoothly. This involves numerous things, including a pre-inspection of every single car so you can see the full quality of the vehicle that you're purchasing online. You can make offers and negotiate right in the app. You can purchase the car through CarSwitch, so it's a mediated and secure transaction. We'll actually assist you with all the paperwork. We'll even join you, physically join you at the government center where you transfer ownership and take over. So I think the way we've tackled it is kind of acknowledging that there are certain legal structures within which you need to operate. And reinventing those or disrupting those is a very long process that would involve regulators, would involve government, and so on. And we thought instead to tackle it from the perspective of saying, how do we marry technology and offline to work with the constraints that exist and facilitate transactions in a safer, more scalable way? So that's effectively how we've done it. Since then, other models have evolved globally that take ownership of the vehicle and effectively become a car dealership, which is a different way of tackling the problem. But I think the premise behind CarSwitch is ultimately, it will always make more sense to buy a car directly from private individuals if you can do so. Because otherwise, as soon as you bring in a dealer, there's margin, there's overhead, there's cost that needs to be covered. So I feel like the real disruption in this is how do you make car buying and selling peer-to-peer? How do you create the Amazon, if you will, who does not necessarily own the inventory? How do you do that in the car space? And that's effectively the problem that we're trying to tackle.
And I suppose the challenge with this, as with any two-way marketplace, is really building up that critical mass at both ends of it. So 100%. How did you go about that in the early days? So from day one, how did you handle that?
I think I think this will echo across all startups and all marketplaces. That is, it is a chicken or egg problem, and the way you go at it is hacking it, right? So you need to find ways, and it is a gradual process. So you need to grow your supply to grow demand, and vice versa. It's very, very difficult day one because you have neither. So where do you even start? And we did this all the way you would kind of expect us to hack it, which is you go to traditional classified sites, you call sellers yourself and get them onboarded to your platform, and in that acquire the inventory. Off the inventory, try to sell the inventory, and gradually build up scale behind it as aggressively and as quickly as you can.
And what point did you have to get it to realize, you know what, there's a real business here, we can make a real go of this, and we should bring in some cash to do so?
Yeah, that's a really good question and a very tough one, right? Because you typically you leave your career and you start something because you believe in it. So day one, you believe that this is the right thing. It makes sense from a value proposition, from a consumer perspective, and so on and so forth. And so I think I didn't need convincing because I'd already started it. So really what it came down is, what does it take to convince others to pile on? And essentially, we, so I'm just trying to remember. So I think our first funding round was probably when we were at $50,000 in net revenue per month. That now, obviously, cars are very high value transactions. So our GMV is through the roof, right? Because it's the car value. But that's not what we monetize. So it was really down to net revenue. And I think what was important there is convincing others or influencing others to believe in the story, first off. And then more so than absolute numbers, I think it was more about showing traction, showing trajectory. You do need, or I felt that we did need to reach a certain threshold that does suggest that this thing could scale or it is a big opportunity. For us, from memory, it was around the $50,000-$60,000 per month in net revenue. Our GMV was probably $1.5 million a month at that stage, or maybe $1 million a month.
Yeah, absolutely. And with that first funding round, then what really changed in the business? Why did you need to bring that money in?
So you start by hacking, and when I say hacking, you're literally hacking everything, right? So to acquire customers, your mailers, flyers, calling, scraping sites, doing some paid marketing activities, but very limited. But then you also are hacking the tech. Because if you try, at least our approach was never to build the end state product day one, because we knew that we needed our customers to teach us what that end state product should look like. And so it was very much MVP. Until today, it's very much MVP on every feature, and it's rapid iteration and changing. So early on, without the full end-to-end tech in place, you still need to complete your transactions. And you do that, again, by hacking it offline, which means call center, which means staff, which means you yourself as a founder running around and doing things yourself. So the biggest impediment to scale early on was frankly me, because me and I can only hire a limited number of people. So we're trying to do a lot of things manually to bridge the gaps, improve the model, and then build those little steps into the product, automate those, and move on to the next step. So I think once we reached at least a critical threshold to say that this has legs, the purpose of our first funding round was to invest in our product and continue to scale from a staffing standpoint so that we can continue the manual intervention where need be. And even till today, 4 years later, we still do a lot of things manually. We obviously do a lot more things automated on the app than we did in our day one. And we still frankly believe that that is the right answer and the right approach, which is if of course you'd love everything to be in the product, but often what you believe is the right answer, the right feature, the right way and flow and UX for a certain feature, you only discover by going through the journey and figuring out all the exceptions, all the bottlenecks, all the problems, and then building them on. It's a bit dirty, right? So it's not the Apple approach of I will launch one thing and it will be right and it will work. You won't be first to market in that approach. And as a startup, the only advantage you have is first to market. So speed, I think, trumps almost everything else.
And through all this growth, so it's a completely different company today to what it was when you first started it. So how do you stay on top of all the compliance side of things? So particularly legal, for instance, when there's everything from the investor side of it to employment law and so on. It's just a huge topic. So how do you stay on top of that?
It's very difficult, I have to admit. So I think at the beginning, so now we're about 60 people. At the very beginning, it was all with me. I think as we grew, as I started to see 20 to 30% of my time became accounting, and I'm not an accountant, had to bring someone in who knows how to do accounting. And then just like I was doing things that I'm not necessarily the best fit for, my chief accountant does a lot of things that are not accounting, right? So you begin to delegate things around admin, HR, employment contracts. So far, really sit with my chief accountant, because I don't really have a finance department, so to speak, with numerous individuals. It's really two folks actually that run it. And I think it's a culture, or we've tried to build a culture across the company of you wear multiple hats and you do what it takes. So I think the short answer on how we've managed, and whether that's the right answer or not, I'm not sure, but the way we've managed it to date is delegating where possible. I think where that breaks down, and it is truly difficult, is when it comes to specifically investors, board-related things, governance-related things that are, that are not that straightforward to delegate, because they're so important that you need direct visibility on. To date, I continue to do that myself. However, at least for me, with my board and the governance that we've put in place, we've kind of taken into account that we need to move quickly, that we will not, run everything necessarily by the book with pre-approvals. We've kind of built in flexibility. The way we budget the business is not a classic corporate budget where, you have to hit the numbers. It's more guidance, it's more goalposts. And I think we have that level of trust and understanding with periodic check-in points that enable some flexibility. So I think the balance that I found for myself with CarSwitch is how to instill the right balance and build the right relationships with your shareholders, with your board, to allow for some flexibility while still giving them comfort that they have visibility on what's going on. And then, of course, when it comes to fundraising rounds and things like that, we have to hire lawyers. So we use agencies, naturally, or law firms, as opposed to in-house counsel, because we frankly don't need it that frequently, right? You're not running around every couple of months. And when that round happens, you bring in the folks. I think the other thing is we've been through two rounds. Once you go through the first round, you kind of become an unqualified lawyer, but you can still navigate the first few conversations your own, because you start to learn the lingo, the tricks, the loopholes. You do absolutely need a lawyer to review it and ensure all the I's are dotted. But I think you can carry it quite a bit after you're familiarized yourself with the first round.
And do you think that's important to really be familiar with it, rather than, because I think people are in two minds where they say, right, we have to outsource it and make sure it's with the professionals. But as you're saying, it's also important to know it yourself to some extent, to make sure you know what's going on. So has that always been something that's important to you?
So I think we're talking about fundraising rounds specifically. So on fundraising, I feel like there's two dimensions to it. There is the commercial, and I have a consulting marketing background, so I guess it's also my natural kind of strengths. There's a commercial aspect to a funding round, and then there is the legal fine print behind all the almost all the mechanisms through which these things are delivered. For me, I felt that it's very important to be aware, involved in the commercial aspects of the funding round and all the terms that are associated with that. So everything around liquidation preferences, drag along rights, et cetera, that do limit your ability to grow the business, raise future funds, your own stake, the stake of your ESOP plan, your employee, et cetera. I think these are so critical to the business and its viability and its success that you have to be involved in it, just like you would be involved in setting the strategy for the business model, the pricing, et cetera. Now, when it comes into the fine print of how these commercial tenants make it into the paperwork, at least I'm not qualified to do that. And it's also not remotely a natural strength of mine. It is a very detailed process that requires quite a familiarity and would take a disproportionate amount of time for me to manage. So I've that is where I leaned on law firms for support, because I know I'm not even remotely close or qualified to cover those aspects. To be honest, my experience as well has been, because obviously as a startup, you're also not hiring, the world's best law firms on the planet, right? I mean, you're getting quotas of small time. And so the amount of time of intention that you get is quite limited. And my experience has been on the commercial aspects, the law firms were not really positioned to provide advice, right? Because that also requires quite a deep understanding of your own personal financial situation, the business's financial situation, your existing shareholders and what they're looking to get out of it. So ultimately, the lawyers, honestly, were not even helpful on the commercial aspects, at least in the way that I had engaged them. I'm sure the picture is different depending on the law firm and what you're doing.
So you've touched on from the beginning, you call it hacking different parts, where you're literally calling people to get them to list on your site and so on, to today dealing with the legal side and the board and everything else. So just paint us a picture of what that transition's been like for you as a founder. How has your role really evolved?
It's hard to, I think, it's hard to almost remember, right? Because it's all a blur, right? You kind of go through it as you're going through it. And I think the hat that you wear day one is, this needs to get done. It'll, whatever it takes, it gets done. So if I need to play the call center role for a couple of days and speak to customers myself and understand what the issues are and what are the opportunities, I will do that. If I need to speak to a lawyer, if I need to share minutes of meeting from a board meeting, right? You kind of do it. And I think it kind of almost happened naturally to a certain extent, is as the business grew, new elements came in. And because of the mindset of I have to do it, I just did it. And as you go through it, it doesn't become as daunting, because you're just kind of doing that task at that time and just figuring it out. And once that task becomes a repeated task that's happening more often and it's taking more of your time, that's when you know you need now support. Somebody else needs to do this because I need to free up my capacity for something else. And so, when we started, we didn't really have a board. Well, we had a board, but it was more almost like friends for advice. And as more external investors came in, the board became more formal. And, gradually became preset meetings with minutes, with documents that you share, in advance, et cetera. And it did evolve, it grew up into that. It wasn't kind of a switch. Bit by bit, you kind of fell into where you are. And the first time it happened, it was uncomfortable. But then the second time, it becomes second nature. And then by the fifth time, you know that this isn't going away. So now I need somebody to help me with it, right?
Absolutely. So let's talk a bit about really growing the customer base today. So I see, for someone with a marketing background that is running a digital platform, essentially, you ran a big billboard campaign last year. So talk to me a bit about the decision behind that and why you decided to go down the billboard route.
Sure. So a lot of these decisions, I think, are made for you, because ultimately you have access to certain amounts of funds, and there are a cost associated with each opportunity, and that limits your degrees of flexibility plus your cash burn, et cetera. Now, I had a marketing background, so to speak, that is a very analytical marketing background. So I was in consulting, and it was all about kind of the analytics and the numbers behind it. So I'm probably more suited for performance marketing rather than branding and awareness and trust. And so your natural affiliations, I think, bias you towards certain channels, which is a real risk. And that's why I think it is super important to have co-founders or leaders within your team that have different backgrounds, because you place more emphasis and importance on one side when really all the sides matter. And I think everyone will admit to that, but living through it is a bit different. So for us, we started digital naturally and all performance-based, because that's what we could afford and that's what we could do, and that was what was sustainable. And that got us a very far way and was very helpful. Now, I think in the product that we operate with, which is again buying and selling of cars, trust is a very important element to it, especially given how involved we are in this specific transaction. So you actually buy the car through CarSwitch. And so you need to acknowledge that this is a legitimate company, registered, not gonna run away with my money, etc. And our experience was that trust and almost reliability, so to speak, is difficult to build purely through digital channels. Once, at least our experience was that once people see you on the street, hear you on the radio, maybe see you on TV, we haven't done TV, but I would imagine they would have that effect, that it changes, first of all, the awareness that folks have around you and how much almost credibility they place in you. The reason we did offline was the stars aligned, right? So COVID was very unfortunate on many dimensions. Very few good things came out of COVID, if any. One good thing from our perspective that came out was the price of paid marketing as the players moved in. And accordingly, a few tactical opportunities for outdoor billboards opened up that were quite affordable. Now, we had dabbled with radio and we had kind of set aside, you know, at least the mental model that I had was 30% of our marketing spend will go on awareness and offline, and it'll go around building trust. But then even the 30%, where do you put it, right? Because it's not enough to do everything. So when that opportunity opened up, it allowed us to test several different mediums in an affordable way and see the reaction and the performance improvement that we had. And now through this year, we've been doubling down on the specific formats that seem to work better for us. So I think we did one thing that came out that was positive for us is it allowed us to learn a little bit more what different channels work for us, where can we reach customers more effectively. I think our experience with outdoor advertising has been it does not drive traffic and it does not drive transactions. So it doesn't help your bottom line. It doesn't help actually grow the business, to be perfectly honest, in the immediate term. I think the other thing that we did see is over the last year, we have seen anecdotally, but we kind of believe that it is building momentum, is you hear from people saying, you know, I heard you on the radio, I saw the billboard, that's why, and I did ultimately click on a Google ad, but I clicked on the Google ad because I had seen you 6 other places and I thought, okay, this must be the real thing. And so we do see that momentum building, and we absolutely see a lot broader awareness exists around the CarSwitch platform in the UAE.
And it's great to see you testing and trialing these different ways of getting out to market. And I guess that's really going to help you now with your next step as you venture into Saudi Arabia. So
Absolutely.
For those that are less familiar with the region, what are the real challenges going to be and the differences going to be when operating in Saudi Arabia compared to Dubai?
So I think we'll uncover all of the challenges as we go through it. So this is a new foray for us. Some of the challenges that have already existed, as well as others that we predict, would be, so one is a tech challenge. So there's a lot of internationalization or customizations that need to occur in order to cater for a new market. This spans into currency differences, regulatory differences, process differences, and how things are done. How things are done there. I think the other challenge that will come about is the almost cultural differences, so to speak. So whether that's in language or even in how, in a marketplace, how peer-to-peer individuals interact and transact, we expect to be different. And so we really do need to approach this again from the MVP perspective of launch as quickly as possible, learn and adapt even quicker. I think the third challenge is really around staff and team. So when it was all CarSwitch in one place in one office and I'm there, I could at least fill in the gaps, plug in the gaps where need be. And I had a lot better visibility on all the different aspects. As we enter another market, I think that luxury goes away because now it is really in a different market, it's a different office, I won't be as close to it, etc. The way I'm trying to tackle that problem is recruiting the right folks, getting the right talent in place to handle that challenge, and that frankly is very difficult. And it's very difficult, I think, for everybody. It's that generally interviewing folks is difficult, right? It's hard to tell. And also for the person, interviewing for a role, it's even hard for them to tell if this is really the right opportunity for them, if this area excites them. So you need to kind of go through that trial. And that is it's an exciting and yet, challenging endeavor.
Well, we're excited to see it roll out and to see you expand. So for those listening, where can they find out more about CarSwitch?
So CarSwitch.com is our home, and that's where you find out everything about us, or the app, of course.
Emma raises a really interesting point around choice of legal advisor. And this is really, really important. It isn't uncommon for founders to find that they're working with several firms and even several individuals within those firms in the early stages of growth. But what's really important is that as businesses grow and change and develop, that they take that evolutionary step to move from the legal advice that they've got at that time to more of a business advisor, somebody who will work with that business going forward as it grows. It's purely a choice, and it's a choice that needs to fit the founder and the business that they're working in. And what's really important from that is that then that business is receiving the right legal advice in the context of its business and its goals. In my experience of working with founders, what is really valuable to them from a lawyer's perspective and what they want from their lawyer is firstly that they understand their business, helps in the context of the advice that's going to be given, that the lawyer is always available to be able to discuss issues and be able to provide off-the-cuff solutions and advice as and when is required. And of course, most importantly, it's not just about the cost, it's about building that relationship and having a good working relationship going forward.